When we think of nurses, we think of people who are kind, compassionate, caring, and they love helping people. Well, today, we are going to talk about the dark side of nursing that you probably haven't heard of. We'll get into it after I hit this music. Joining me this week is Nurse Practitioner Tina Baxter. Tina, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I was really excited when you sent me an email and told me about your topic because I worked in the healthcare system since right out of high school. I was 18 years old. I became a nurse aide, worked in it till I was about 41, 42 years old. I left as an endoscopy technician for Mayo Clinic. And I'm excited to hear your stories because I've seen some of the stuff firsthand. Tina, before we get started about our topic, tell us about yourself. How'd you get into the healthcare system?
Well, interesting enough, I started out as a CNA as well.
Okay.
Or actually, if I go back, even I started as a lab technician. So I interned in the lab during high school. It was a high school program, and I worked in the lab for about 3 years over the summer. And then I became a nursing assistant while I was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life when I decided not to go to medical school. And so then I had to figure something out. So I got a job working as a CNA, and that led me to nursing. And that's been a love affair for over 25 years now. I just love what I do as a nurse. I went back to school and became a nurse practitioner. And then I got hit by the entrepreneurial bug, and now I help other nurses build their dreams as well.
Awesome. What area of focus is your nurse practitioner in?
Gerontology. So I work with older adults.
Okay.
So my background is mental health and psychiatry. I worked in mental health for a very long time, addictions, and I missed long-term care. I missed working with older adults. And so now I get to marry both worlds and do a lot of geropsychiatry.
Yeah. So the topic and title of this episode is Nurses Eat Their Young. It sounds a little harsh, horrible, but Tina, what have you experienced or witnessed firsthand when we got these brand new, eager nurses starting their career for the very first time?
One of the things that I experienced early on as a brand new nurse, and I had some wonderful mentors, so my experience wasn't completely negative. But I had a particular manager that she was not honest. That was the biggest thing. In fact, I learned so much from her about what not to do as a manager so that I could be the polar opposite of her when I became a manager. So she would lie. She would say things like, I want you to do this, right? And tell you so you would do it. And then when it didn't work out to how she wanted it to go or whatever, she got pushed back from upper management. Then she denied saying that. It got so bad and so toxic. And again, I was a brand new nurse. So this is my first nursing job.
Yeah.
It was so toxic that I flat out refused to do anything that she told me to do unless she put it in writing.
Yeah.
Because she would frequently forget what she just told you to do. And my first night off of orientation, I was immediately put into the fire as charge nurse. So I was in orientation on second shift and I was charge nurse on third shift. And my manager said, if you have any problems, just give me a call. Well, I had no unit secretary, had a nursing assistant who had very bad knees. We had patients that needed vital signs every 2 hours. And so, and we had 2 admissions that night. So I was running around crazy. I called her for support to ask questions. And of course, she never answered her phone. So fast forward to about a year or so later, and I had, jumped in, stepped up, did a whole lot of things. I was adjunct faculty for the local community college during that time because they wanted a clinical instructor with a BSN to teach the LPN students who were getting their RN because they got rid of all the LPNs at the hospital. So it was a hospital program with the college. And so I had to do their clinical rotation in psychiatry. Nobody else would do it. So I said, I'll do it. So I've been a nurse for about a year. So I had done all those things, hopped in committees, did all the stuff that, you do. You're very eager in your first job. And because of that, another hospital asked me to come on as their very first nurse supervisor in psychiatry. So I told my boss, hey, I'm getting ready to go take this job. I'm leaving. And again, this was a very toxic work environment to where I ended up working 3 doubles back to back.
Oof.
And I'm talking about 16-hour days, and they would have made it 20 if they could have gotten away with it. But anyway, so I was leaving. I had opportunity to get a promotion, so I was leaving. And she sat there in the interview, my exit interview, and said, "Well, do you really think you're ready to be supervisor?" I just looked back at her and I said, "Well, you know what? They think I'm ready to be a supervisor," and
Well,
left it at that.
they made you a charge nurse first day out of orientation, a brand new student, first day of orientation. I remember when my wife became a charge nurse, it didn't happen the first day. One, she had to apply for it, you
Mhm.
know, and two, there'd be no way, like, the only hospital experience I have is Mayo Clinic in Mankato.
Mhm.
So there's no way they would have allowed a brand new nurse. Oh, by the way, you're charge nurse. You're responsible for everything. Like, gosh, that's like a setup for failure on day
Mhm.
one.
Mhm. Yeah, they just basically said, "Well, we have no one else to come into work, so you're going to be it. You're on call, so now you're charged."
Was this like a small town hospital?
This was the only hospital in the area. I won't call their name because people may know who they are.
Yeah, that's fine.
This is before they were bought by a larger system.
Okay, but like, how big's the population are we talking about that you guys
And
are
it's a
serving?
college town, so yeah, it's
Okay, so it's
probably
like my
mid-sized.
town.
Yeah, mid-sized
Yeah,
city. And here's the thing. This is what you would get. You would go to these staff meetings and they would say things like, "Well, if you don't want to work here, you can always go work somewhere else," knowing that there's no other hospital in the city, right? So you'd have
yeah,
to go out of the city for a lot of people. And it was just that type of toxicity. I remember when I was a nursing student, the hospitals would play this game where they would lay off all the experienced nurses and hire new grads.
yeah,
And so the nurses on the pediatric floor at this particular hospital would not train us. We didn't hardly do anything with a patient while we were in nursing school because they were afraid we're there to take all their jobs. So those are some of those negative experiences that you can have. Little snide comments. You ask a question, they, give you the side eye, like, shouldn't you know that? Didn't you go to school, become a nurse? Didn't you get a bachelor's degree? Because this was back when a lot of the nurses were either diploma nurses or associate degree nurses. So if you went and got a bachelor's degree, there's a lot of friction there, saying, well, you think you're better than us, that type of thing.
yeah.
And I'm like, I don't like to play those particular games. So I had some really great nurses that were supportive of me and would make sure that I got extra experience and they would walk you through things. And then, of course, you had some that are just, out for themselves and were bitter people. But as
Yeah,
a new person, it's hard to navigate that.
the fact in orientation they told you if you don't like working here, go find a new job should have been like your first red flag. I was like, boy.
Yeah.
I had a friend who worked at our local Walmart distribution center, and she did it just for like the holidays. And she told me her first day out there in orientation, the shift leader, whatever, says, "Now I know half you guys are gonna quit by next week." I was like, gosh, you're already, putting that thought into their head that this job sucks and,
Hmm.
you know, get ready to find a new job. It baffles me that they would do that in orientation. They would actually just say that, but especially with a shortage of nurses. Now you're a nurse practitioner. Have you experienced new nurses getting bullied by the experience? Have you seen a lot of that? Can you share some of those stories?
Yeah. So I remember in my graduate school, I had a preceptor for my program who happened to, by the way, be gerontology, the major that I eventually transferred to. And the staff, the faculty were all like, "She's wonderful. She's great." They really pumped her up. "You're going to love working with her." And it was not a pleasant experience. I saw some unprofessional behavior that I hadn't experienced in quite a while. I mean, things were like she was throwing charts and
Wow.
yelling about something that didn't get done and just having a hissy fit over things. And so then she wouldn't let me do things, didn't really want to talk to me. And so she reported back to the faculty that I seemed tired when I came to clinical. Well, of course I was tired. I worked second shift. I was second shift supervisor. And then I would get up that morning and go to clinical with her. And it was just not a good environment. And so I noticed some of those things as well, that kind of bullying behavior. I ended up retaking that course and had a wonderful instructor. And I so enjoyed her to say, I know. I just spoke with another nurse that when she started her nursing career, she's out of California and she became a nurse. She was working at this particular hospital, and I can't remember exactly what her specialty was, but she wanted to get a job in that same specialty as a nurse. And the nurses were so cold to her because she had previously been a tech on their floor and had been a CNA for years. And they just didn't want to show her anything. So she had to
So
learn all on her own. And the only two real supportive people that she had were these two doctors that helped her out and would take her into procedures and show her, what they were doing with the surgeries and things like that. And that's how she got a lot of her training because the other nurses just didn't want to do it because she'd been an aide for so long.
why do you think that is? I mean, you think like the nurses I worked with, I had really good nurses. I mean, you get those bad eggs, but
Hmm.
that was them to everybody. It wasn't just to me personally. But when I saw a nurse aide go from nurse aide to RN, I mean, like I always saw the nurses welcome them because that's like, all right, you got more help now. You can have days off. Um, why do you think these nurses were, you know, trying to set her up for failure on day one?
Oh, when I asked her about that, she said that part of it is that she has been told before by several people that she intimidates them and she doesn't understand why. But I think I do because I've had that people say that to me as well. And when people don't expect you to know what you're doing and know your stuff and at the top of your game, and
Yeah,
maybe they aren't, they feel threatened sometimes. And
yeah.
that's what I discovered is that a lot of times it had nothing to do with me personally. It was that that person was perceiving me somehow as a threat of some sort. Um,
So I have a story about that a little bit. So when I was working as a nurse aide at the hospital, there's a clinic attached to it, and there was this doctor who worked in urology, and he was blank in urology, which I thought was funny because that's just the way he was.
mhm.
But he told a nurse, unless you have more initials behind your name, I'm not going to take your opinion. And I was just floored because this nurse was trying to advocate for her patient, and the doctor didn't want to hear it just because she didn't have the initials, like the MD or the DO behind her name. I mean, I
I find that laughable because typically nurses have a lot more initials behind their names than doctors.
yeah,
If you've ever seen it, we put in every certification that we have, you add it to so you could have a lot of alphabet soup after your name. But I've run into that with some physicians as well that didn't want to listen to their nurses. And I actually, when I was a supervisor, there was a case where my night shift nurse was trying to explain to the doctor something about the patient. And I just remember coming in and he was in her face, like almost to her nose to nose, right? Screaming at her, yelling at her to say, stand down, stand down. He was ex military.
yeah,
And she was just trying to explain, no, this is what actually happened. And he just would not listen. He was a locum physician. So that was my first time to have to be in a position as supervisor to write up a physician. So I had to write it up and submit it to the agency that sent him to us. So they ended up removing him. He had a lot of other personality issues as well. Again, he was a traveling physician because we had
yeah.
locums at the time. And so it was that kind of bullying behavior. I'll never forget one time as a nursing student, I'm sitting in the emergency room, right? We're doing our rotation. And there's this guy, and he's just having a fit and just cussing and throwing stuff. And I'm thinking, what's going on? So, me having worked in, psychiatry and things like that, I'm like, I think there's something wrong with this guy. Are you guys not going to call security on him? And the nurses were like, that's the doctor.
Oh, that's funny.
And then one of the other doctors said, hey, our nursing student wants to call security on you. I think you better tone it down. And
That's
he was
great.
great the rest of the shift.
That's funny. I had a doctor. He didn't tell me. He told the nurse. Someone asked him this question, and I was very brave of this person. This doctor was a orthopedic doctor, and she goes, "Why are you so mean?" Just bluntly, and he goes, if I'm mean to people, they won't make a mistake. And I guess looking at his point of view, I guess it kind of makes sense a little bit. Maybe if you're not in the healthcare system, you probably won't say why does that not make sense? But because you don't want to tick him off because you have to work with this guy. But what's your thought on that when you have doctors who are being mean because they're thinking they're doing you a service by you won't screw up if I'm mean to you because you're afraid of me?
I think you're actually doing a disservice, and I'm going to say why. There's a physician that used to be in our town, and he happened to be my doctor. And he was very belittling to me as a patient, and it got back to me that he belittled his nurses.
Oh,
And that made me think, you take me in for surgery, and I have to have surgery, or I'm in the hospital, and you're my doctor, and the nurses are too afraid to call you, because I had to deal with this with a nurse that would cry every time she had to call this particular doctor. And so I said, if they're too afraid to call you, then this is how mistakes happen.
yep,
Communication doesn't go well. This causes problems. And so I ultimately had to fire him as my doctor because I was afraid if something goes south, they're not going to call him.
yeah,
And so then, interesting enough, the other doctors sort of, I don't, you know how doctors are very protective of their own. They
yep,
worked it out somewhere where they encouraged him to leave the city without having to fire him, if that makes sense.
that makes total sense.
But yeah, it could backfire on you. And there's a way for you to be tough on someone and have high expectations without belittling them. And so I set the tone really early with my students. I say, hey, I expect y'all to do great. I expect excellence out of you. I expect you to show up like you are ready to work every time. And so I set the bar so high for them. And so when they, sometimes you make mistakes, I take them aside and say, hey, this is a learning opportunity. Now, never do that again, right?
Yeah,
I had a unit secretary that I hired. And when I hired her, she said she was familiar with working on the computer and et cetera, et cetera. So we sent her to computer training and she's like, I'm just not getting it. I just can't get it. I'm not getting it. So she would never want to work as a unit secretary. She just preferred to work as a tech. And I said, but we need you to be cross trained. Now, you said you were familiar with working on the computer. You said all this. Well, she said, well, I kind of didn't, sort of. And I said, oh, well, you got 2 weeks to figure this out. So then she started working with some other staff to say, please, please, please help me understand this. Because if you don't, Tina's going to fire me, right?
yeah.
Because I told her, I said, hey, you said, now
Well,
this is
that's right.
after being in training for over 90 days. Okay. You said you were familiar with this certain systems. You are not. You were dishonest. So you got 2 weeks to prove it. I'm giving you 2 extra weeks. And you're going to be sitting there one-on-one learning this. Do you know that when I left that position, that woman cried and kept begging me to come back to be her boss again?
Wow.
I say that to say there's a way that you can work with people. You can be firm. You can set boundaries. You can do all those things and set your expectations without being a bully.
Yeah.
That's important. I wish some of our other leaders would hear that. You hear stories about people who own famous tech companies whose names I will not call, who are very big bullies. And what do they find out? That their talent, after a while, they figure out their worth. And we don't have to sit here. We can go to the guy next door. We can go, work somewhere else. And this is what happened in that situation at that hospital. They had so much turnover at that hospital in that particular unit that they demoted the manager and the vice president that was over that department. They demoted her as well because it
Wow.
was just that bad, because they had so much staff leave. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was like a revolving door. And I lasted about a year and a half there. Like I said, it was my very first nursing job. So I wanted to, do well. This is my first time making nursing pay, right? After being an
Yeah.
aide forever. So that was a huge thing. And I don't look at that as a negative experience because I did learn a lot and I made some great friends. And there were some great nurses that worked with me. Like one of my best nurses was an LPN by the name of Nellie. She was about 70 years old, and she was tough as nails and knew her stuff. And she would walk up to the biggest male patient, 250 pounds. She was like 80 pounds soaking wet. She'd get right into their face and say, "Now, listen, young man, I want you to go in there, lie down, and go to sleep. We don't want any trouble out of you tonight. We'll talk about it in the morning." And they would just hang their head and go, "Yes, ma'am." Now, it just took 6 security guards to bring them in, but she wasn't afraid to go up and talk
It's
to them.
funny.
It's like, "I'm going to give you this medicine. You're going to go to sleep. You're going to take it. You're going to go back there. It'll be fine in the morning. I don't want any problems out of you." And they would just be like, "Yes, ma'am." And they would go right to bed. She was like everybody's grandma. And she
Yeah.
just had a way of taking authority that they respected. She never bullied. She never put them down. She never put herself in harm's way or any way. But it was just the way she approached them with respect that they were instantly like, "Okay, we're going to calm down. We're not going to hurt this older
Yeah.
lady." Right? Yeah.
Going back to nurses eating their young,
hmm
what was the turnover rate that you saw with brand new nurses when they started? Like, how long did they stay in that hospital or nursing home, whatever, and then they just go look for a new job because of the older nurses just picking on them?
Well, I'm going to say currently, right now, the new surveys have come out. Brand new nurses are lasting like 2 years. And
Okay.
part of this was coming through the pandemic. That was a whole big issue. But also is the lack of support. You have to remember a lot of these nursing students that graduated during that time, they didn't have a lot of clinical experience. So they
Yeah.
weren't on the floor like they should have been. And sometimes there's just they were thrown into situations they weren't ready for. And then with the understaffing or lack of staffing, of however you want to say it, that we had, it was a lot of pressure. And when you're just learning your craft, to be thrown into that and been told, "Oh, by the way, you got 3 months experience, so you're the most senior person working
Yeah.
here," is tough. And so I understand how horrible that can feel. And a lot of times we're taught as nurses, when you graduate, go to med surge, right? Everybody needs to go to med surge. That's what we're told. But not everyone feels comfortable there. And so teaching the newer nurses to have a voice and to stand up for themselves and just, to learn that no question is a dumb question, right?
Yeah.
You could ask questions and make it important. A lot of times when people become preceptors, it's one or two things. You either apply, some places have, you apply to be a preceptor and you get a little extra bump in your pay. But a lot of times you're just told, "Oh, by the way, you got a student or you got a new nurse you got to train." And they don't train the preceptors to be good preceptors. So if you
Yeah.
get anybody out there doing it makes the experience very negative. And so when we set up our precepting program, one of the things I did was to make sure that the person wanted to be a preceptor, and we would evaluate them and how they were able to precept. And if you're not a good preceptor, we just don't assign new employees to you.
Yeah. Because not everybody is cut out for teaching. Teaching's a
Right.
whole new skill you have to learn. You can be great working with people, but when you gotta teach somebody, that's a whole new skill. And I teach kids for a living. It's tough. It's
hmm
something it's something that you can't learn. You just have to know how to do. I remember when I was an aide, I had a brand new nursing student. Her name was Lindsay, and she didn't know how to put somebody into the sling for the lift to get them out of bed. And I just showed it to her. So, I feel like some of these nurses who go through college, like I feel like they have so much stuff they have to learn that they tend to miss some of these simpler things that you think that they would do. And
Yes.
the nurses who've been in nurses for like 30 years, 40 years, I can't say 20 years because my wife's been a nurse for 20 years, but but these nurses who've been a nurse for a very long time, I think they tend to forget what it's like their first day of being nursing. And, you know, maybe we should, do you think we need to change the standards of training for nurses? So maybe they can say, do we need to train the students so they can meet the expectations of the older nurses, or which now that I think about it, it's kind of hard to do because they don't have the experience. But
Well, I think part of it, what it is that it's almost like a hazing, right?
yeah,
I had to go through it, so you have to go through it. And this is something that is not just in nursing, but I noticed that in medicine as well. I remember when they changed some of the rules about letting the residents sleep and get their proper rest because they were making mistakes. And we were
Yeah.
showing that, mistakes happen. And a lot of the feedback that we got from the older doctors were, well, I had to go through it. I had to do it. And that's kind of the same way with nurses. They're like, well, I had to deal with it. I had to figure it out. I had to learn it. So you have to. And so I think we need to change some of that
Yeah.
narrative. And that I think is a really wrong mindset. And so if we start out from the beginning in helping nurses understand how to educate and be good preceptors and how to facilitate learning, not everyone learns the same way. There are some
Yep.
nurses that can read something, they got it, they can do it. There's others that need to see it demonstrated and they have to do it themselves and teach it back to you. So we have to be flexible in our approach. We just can't use a one size fits all. And it's one of the things I had to learn as an educator and as a preceptor is to slow down.
Yeah.
Things that come easily to me may not come easily to others. And it was that epiphany that helped. And this is one of the reasons why I'm thankful for a unit secretary that I had. I was training a nurse on how to do something on the computer, and he had to stop me. He said, now, I understand you know what you're doing and you are familiar with this. But I could tell from the look on her face, she had no clue what you were talking about when you just went through that. And it was him having the strength and the foresight to see that, and insight, I
Yeah.
should say, to see that and to stop me. And that helped me so much. And I remember that not everybody will get it the first time. Not everybody will get it the same way that you do. So you need to slow down and make sure you're bringing everyone along. Now, that being said, obviously, like the woman that was supposed to learn the computer training, this was basically her not having confidence in herself,
Yeah.
but I had confidence that she could learn it. And so if I gave her a deadline, I knew that she would rise to the challenge. So
Yeah.
there's a little bit of difference in that. But as I said, I think a lot of it is that model behavior. It's like being in a family of dysfunction
Yeah.
where you see mom and dad fight all the time. It may get physical. So then now you pick a spouse and you guys fight all the time and it may get physical. And then your kids see that and it just keeps the cycle going. And I
Yeah.
think that's
It never
partially what's
ends.
happening. It never ends. But we
Yep.
have to be the ones to stand up and say, not anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you got nurses saying, well, I went through that, I would say back, well, did you enjoy that? Do you want to
Yes.
keep these new nurses? These new nurses, they're probably not married. A lot of them probably not married yet. They can get up and leave and make your job more work. So why would you do that to your new nurses?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Tina, I want to thank you so much for coming on my podcast. If people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
They can always reach out to me at the nursesharkacademy.biz. That's my website. Or you can follow me on my social media. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else. And so I'd be happy to provide those links as well.
Yeah, awesome. And if you're listening on audio, I'll have all that information in the description. And on YouTube, you obviously, I don't have to say it, you saw it go across the screen. So, Tina, thanks again for coming on today.
Thank you.
And for myself, you can always find us at our very own website, which is www.breakingbullying.com. You can also reach out to us at our email address. If you have a story of your own bullying to share, or for whatever reason you want to get a hold of us, our email address is breakbullyinghere@gmail.com. Now, if you're a victim of bullying and you don't know where to turn, there is online resources to help you. The first is the government's very own anti-bullying website, and the address is www.stopbullying.gov. And other online resource is www.pacer.org/bullying. Now, if you have had thoughts of suicide or of self-harm, we implore you to stop. Reach out to the National Suicide Hotline. That number is very simple. It's 988. I'm Tim Flynn, and thank you for listening, and we will be back next week to continue the conversation to break the silence on bullying.